Welcome back to another episode of Relatively Damaged Live. My name is Angela, and this is
Cat.
the live shows are currently streamed to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. If you see something on our show that you like, or you just think we're talking about interesting things that you want to share, please do. And tell your friends to follow and subscribe. All on the Monday segment of our show, Kat and I talk about topics that we find interesting. And today's topic is it's not how important is it? Is it important to take a stand? I almost said how important is it? And Kat, I'm thinking you've got the quotes ready because I forgot to ask you if you wanted to do it or me.
I have two quotes today, but I'd like to close with the second quote. So I'm going to open with this quote. And this is from Archbishop Desmond Tutu. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor.
If you are neutral, okay, in times of injustice or in situations, then you've chosen the oppressor.
The side of the oppressor, yes.
Right. You've chosen to stand with them. I am really trying to think of that. And I know I read it beforehand, but I don't think I read it. And now we're 100% focused on it. So I think, yes. I think that, but I also think, like, when you go to a business meeting and it seems like the loudest voice wins type of thing. I'm thinking that maybe in this situation, that is almost the same thing. The person who's loudest wins in the sense of, because no one else is saying anything and there's no opposition, and not even opposition, but like the challenging of the idea on how the oppressor, or but yeah, I that's tough, because I also see where it could start like this whole battling dynamic.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of in terms of maybe large systems. I mean, we can pare it down to relationships, but I'm looking like in Nazi Germany, for example. I mean, yes, they had a whole propaganda apparatus going to try and hide the truth from people as possible. But people knew the truth. And they chose to do that whole monkey doesn't see thing.
Well, but sometimes
monkey doesn't speak.
Right. Well, as you say that, a thought that's coming to my mind is sometimes people will know the truth and not be able to see it, even though they know it, like on a deeper level, and they can't see it, like because if as soon as they see it, then something inherently has to change in their life, right? Like women or men in domestic violence relationships. Mm-hmm. As soon as they recognize the abuse, they have to leave. But if they don't see it or they don't recognize it, then they don't have to do anything. And I think that sometimes, like, people are wondering, how come you didn't get out of that situation?
Excuse me.
Bless you. Even though they're aware but not aware. Do you see where I'm going on that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think of that awareness is almost kind of like a being asleep, because the horror of it, almost might be too much to bear.
Right.
And like with domestic violence, you've heard of the burning bed kind of thing, where if a woman is abused, she and doesn't address it in a more positive way, like, what are my choices? What do I have to do? She'll just snap.
Right.
And
so, then, okay, right.
Yeah.
And then she turns into the or something when she snaps finally, then it's a domestic violence situation more so.
Right.
But now from her behavior and not from the other person's behavior.
Right.
Okay.
And I just want to make sure that we recognize that domestic violence, while primarily it's male against female, it is not exclusive. And so we don't want to, even though we may be using gendered language, I don't want to make sure that everybody knows we may use gendered language, but we realize that there's other cases.
Oh yeah. And I'm trying, speaking of gender, and by the way, hi cousin Trevor, but I'm not his cousin today. Apparently you are, Kat.
Oh, okay.
He says cousin Kat.
That's
so you
okay.
are
I
now
feel
part
like
of the
we're all
joke.
cousins.
Yeah,
in the great family of the world.
It's true. It's true. Oh shoot! Now I forgot where I was going with this thought here.
About gender.
Oh yes, gender. About using like Z and here, which are the other pronouns and that are out there, or they and them. And I feel like Z and here might be more helpful. Because it's ZE, I believe, and then HIR, for which would refer to male or female.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hard trying to change that stuff and being consciously aware that, so thank you for pointing that out. Mm-hmm. And because I don't want to live in a dualistic world. I want to live in a non-dualistic world.
Or like Trevor says, non-binary. Yeah.
Yeah, versus binary. But anyway, so back to the topic, taking a stand. Sometimes, though, I think in taking a stand, especially for people who aren't used to taking a stand, it can look very different compared to a quiet taking of the stand versus like someone who has been in an abusive situation where it's all of a sudden it's roar, I'm mm-hmm. Finally, it's like to get up the courage to take a stand, and it's terrifying, but how it comes across is very power hungry, maybe. I don't know if that's a good way to put it.
It can be. This was a topic that I had suggested for us to talk about. And I think where I'm really coming from, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, but with all of the changes going on, the leaked Supreme Court document, and the questions of what does this mean and where do I have to take a stand? Mm-hmm. Because if we take it in one isolated thing, so here's this one isolated case. Well, I'm a menopausal woman without children. So I'm like, well, does it affect me now? No. Is it going to have an immediate impact on my life? No. Are there ramifications that can spread out from this? Absolutely. And could those ramifications affect me? Absolutely. So I have to decide as to what stand I'm going to take. But the thing is that these issues are so complicated. They're not just a simple issue of, is this right or is this wrong? And so in that, what do I take a stand? I don't necessarily want to go out there and march on either side, but I do feel strongly about my opinion. And so how do I take that stand? Because I think what's going to happen is the ramifications for everyone, for every woman, for every person on the outside are very important to consider. And so what does that mean? Rather than take a specific principle or specific act, look at the overall freedoms that it gives us, and our freedoms being limited.
I love that you're talking about this. It's really interesting because I think that gets into freedom is truly allowing room for someone to make a yes or no choice, like that they get to make that decision. And there's a quote from Marshall B. Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication that says, "We all pay dearly when people respond to our values and needs, not out of a desire to give from the heart, but out of fear, guilt, or shame." And I think that by limiting the whether or not women are able to get abortions, they're going to be many of them are going to react out of fear, or when they become pregnant, if they become pregnant, and then will find themselves in a really horrible situation. And it almost is, I think, especially the way that the law is written in Texas, which kind of got all this started because people are able to civilly sue if they know of someone who goes to get an abortion. They're able to civilly sue. And so it almost turns into like a witch hunt. Now we're turning people against each other. And I think that's really sad and really disappointing, because in a free society, now how are people going to behave if they don't know? And we're at a point in our society, in at least I think in this country, where that emotional intelligence isn't there.
Right.
We're not even talking about those things. And it's just very frustrating, because I feel like I can understand the perspectives of, people who don't want it and the people who do want it. And again, I have to go back to, well, what is freedom? And freedom means I get to choose. And in my life, when I start trying to control other people, that's a problem. Or if they're, or when someone tries to control me, whew, those feelings, man, wow.
well, exactly. And so, a couple things that you said. So when you said about the basically allowing people in Texas to sue other people for doing that, it reminds me a lot of when they went back to the times of slavery, when you had to catch them and return them to their master. People wanted freedom. They wanted their autonomy. They wanted freedom from slavery. And yes, that was a particular kind of bondage, and I'm certainly not comparing the two, but it's a slippery slope. When we start limiting the freedoms of people to do certain things, as long as those things don't impinge on the freedom of other people.
Right. And let's talk about slippery slopes real quick.
Sure.
Because it's really interesting. I cannot remember which book. I mean, you guys know I love reading, and I read a lot. And this was a long time ago. But the slippery slope, like for instance, when a politician, when we see them finally get caught for taking a bribe or something like that, it didn't start there. It started with a pen, for instance, right? Here, let me give you this pen. In fact, it is actually known that, when nonprofits would go to the airport, I think there was a study on this, and gave freely something to someone, that their donations increased significantly. So what I'm saying when we're talking about that boomer.
Yeah, boomer.
But that slippery slope starts with a tiny thing. And then because that small thing was justified, it's just a pen. Next, it's maybe a dinner or a lunch. Then it's a fancy feast. Then it's a trip to the golf course. Then it's a trip to another country.
Well, can I got to stop you right there.
Yeah.
Having been a quiet boomer.
Boomer thinks it's her show.
Yeah, she does. Hold on one second. Let me let her out of the room.
Yeah. Boomer's being sequestered now.
Come on, Boomer. Go outside.
Oh, yeah, those yeah, Trevor, I love what you say about freedom is limited as long as you do what they say, which is not really freedom.
Okay,
So here's
sorry
that.
about that.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So, having been a former public employee, we actually had to take an ethics test every year, and there were ethics regulations, and the amount of so-called gifts was capped. So when I went to a conference, I could take a pen or a tote bag or a piece of chocolate, whatever, from the vendors. Um, but I couldn't go out to meals with them. I couldn't accept fancy gifts. I couldn't accept for on behalf of my organization a a book scanner, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll give you one book scanner, see how you like it, in hopes that I'll buy 10 more of them, you know.
Right.
We couldn't do that. So it was very small gifts. They were capped. The problem that comes in is the lack of oversight. So in those cases, I think people are trying to get away from the oversight. This is the whole thing. That's why it's important to take a stand. It's important to have these checks and balances in the system so that these kinds of abuses can't take place.
Even so, here's my thought. I worked in the medical field, and reps would bring in meals all the time, or pens, or this or that, and I think there was then this underlying obligation to write prescriptions for those medications, and I don't have the statistics, but I would think that those that we saw most often had to justify whether or not they were going to bring food to our office. So it would lead me to believe that it did increase their pharmaceutical sales, which to me is a problem anyway. But but so even those little gifts to the clinicians allowed those clinicians on a subconscious level to start making, then they would want to write those prescriptions. So then they took a stand, and it was a subconscious biased stand that this is the better medication than the other one. And the same thing happens. I think we've talked about the Stanley Milgram study before too, about the shocking, where there's a Confederate who is pretending that they're being shocked, and I think it's up to 450 volts, and there's just someone in a white coat, so someone in a power position, and they're simply saying that the experiment must continue. If someone asks if it can end, the experiment must continue. Well, little do they know the experiment continues whether you leave or stay. That's the experiment, right? That's what they wanted to know.
Right.
So that power it becomes really hard to take a stand, or like the prisoner experiment that was done at Stanford.
Well, think of this. So, what is advertising? Propaganda. My product is better than other products, or you really need this product. So whether it be as a consumer, or as like in your case, the medical field, buy our drugs because we're giving you stuff. In government, give us contracts, buy our products for your organization. Because we're giving you stuff. That's what it comes down to. So part of taking the stand to swing back to this for me, is education. It's where do I stand, and why do I stand where I stand, and what responsibilities do I have? So as a citizen of the world, I have a responsibility to my community, to my state, to my country, to follow my conscience, what I think is the best thing for that. I wish all our politicians would do that, but apparently it's now a free for all of what they can get. Because
Well, I
I don't
think
think there's those checks and balances there.
right.
It's
Well, and again, they're not crossing party lines like they used to, which means that there's a price to be, I would, from my perspective, I'm not going to say that factually, like as if it was a fact, but to me, it feels like I know for a fact they aren't crossing party lines the way they used to. I know that. So that means that as soon as they say something, then they have to, it's like do or die type thing. And then what it doesn't allow for is that broader sense of communication and understanding, right? Like,
exactly.
so I can't even be open to other potential solutions because if I am, then I'm not in line with this over here. And this over here is so much more important than being open to communication. But, so that's like when you're saying about the, about the being open to to the information, like what do I have to do? Well, part of me has to be willing to be challenged, I would think.
Exactly. I'm coming into this, and this is the problem that I'm finding personally on is it important to take a stand? In short, I believe yes, it is to know where I stand on certain issues, on certain things, coming from a place of consciousness. But because we tend to be so divided on things, you know, well, uh, I'm going to cancel my Disney Plus subscription because even though my young children like it and they want to watch it, I need to own the libs,
Mm.
or well, I'm not going to go on vacation to Texas because why would I want to contribute to the Texas economy because I got to own you know the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of things, and it's just insane. Instead of saying, let's really look at this, and what are these decisions going to really do? What is the impact? And they may have that initial impact of, you know, like the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They think they should have this Donbass region and have that thing. So that's their propaganda going on. This
Mm-hmm.
is part of Russia. Da, 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 da. And so the Russian people hear that and they want to believe that. But what is the cost? What
Right,
is
but
the real
from,
cost of these things? Of
well,
the
I
stands
have
that
a,
we're taking?
well, but as soon as I think as soon as I've made that decision, I've literally cut off any other decisions from being made.
Exactly.
And that, so how would one stay open to the possibility that maybe that decision isn't the best decision? I think that maybe there is some truth to what people are saying. What's the underlying truth? Because usually there's something there that maybe I'm just not aware of a lot of times. And can I stay calm enough? I'm going to say that to even hear that. Hmm.
And
Yeah,
that's
right. I
that's
agree.
that's the hard yeah, that's the hard thing. And I think it's even harder when you have someone who is firmly entrenched on one side of a stand to interact with them in a logical way. So you almost have to, in order for there to be balance, to take that far other position to balance it out. And I think what I struggle with is how do I take a stand from the middle?
Well, I think that's a fantastic question. And perhaps maybe it's not about taking a stand from the middle so much as it is, okay, this is where I believe I stand, and I want to understand where you stand. Instead of saying because then I think people wonder, well, they're just a flip-floppy person, right? Well, it's not about being flip-floppy or not, but sometimes I need to, in order for me to even start the conversation, I need to say, this is where I stand right now.
Well, I
Can
think
you
the right
explain to
now
me?
is operative. The right now.
Right. Can you explain to me how you got to your conclusion? Because you know what? Maybe there's something in there, and maybe there's not. Maybe there's not something in there, and I can go, yeah, you know what? I think we're going to just agree to disagree, because I don't think because that thought process doesn't work for me, or what I see as a potential outcome from this is not something that I'm okay with. But I think we all have to be open to, yes, it's important to take a stand, and it's important to be open to the possibility that maybe the stand that I'm taking isn't necessarily helpful.
And then at some point you may have to write off those other people who are not engaging, or who, like you say, you can't have that stand. And then to make a decision, but stay open still.
Yeah. I had Rumi, I'm going to bring this one. I know you've got a closing quote, but Rumi once wrote, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there." Which is really like I think that's a beautiful human place to come from. Because even in my own life, when I feel wronged, if I can get past that to understanding the other person's, whatever it is for them, which really has nothing to do with me most of the time, that then I can really still love their humanness. And appreciate that they made the best decision that they thought they needed to make at that moment in time, regardless of whether or not it hurt me. And that probably takes a lot of courage. And I'm also a firm believer that we don't know what we're doing. Including me.
Pretty much, we're all just fumbling through life. And that brings up an interesting point about, and you and I have talked about this a lot before, and I think we may have talked about this on the show. We can't really change what other people think. We talked about influence a couple weeks ago, I think, and what that's about, and changing a stand. And ultimately, we each have to make our own choices on what is best for us. And I would just hope that we all follow our inner guidance, our true self, and come from a place of love. And I think that's, for me, that's where that is my line in the sand.
Yeah. And I would think a trigger to see if I'm doing that is if I'm feeling like I need to impose my will on someone else. And if that is, and that it might just be a sign when I feel like I have to, that would be a sign for me to go, oh, hold on a second. This is that feeling that means I'm not coming from love. And if I'm not coming from love, then I'm not allowing them room to make a yes, to choose one way or another, or even something different than what I think they should be choosing.
We should, I know we're about ready to close.
Yep.
So, so I'm saying is that, as much as we're advocating, I think here being open, there comes a point in time where we have to take a stand. And so here's our quote, and this is by an unknown. So, whatever you are not changing, you are choosing. Read that again. Whatever you are not changing, you are choosing.
So true. So true. Well, everybody, that's our 30 minutes for today. I'm Angela.
And I am Kat.
And if you want to hear more podcasts where I talk with people about struggle, you can find them on Spotify, Apple. I mean, probably most anywhere. Just look for Relatively Damaged. And I feel like I'm forgetting something in the closing, Kat. Am I forgetting something?
You usually do where I interview other guests, but you basically.
Oh, yeah, I just said, yeah. So we got it. Hallelujah.
Just the short version.
Yeah, it was a very short version. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.